Now, when you're getting to filmmaking outside, there is one piece of equipment that you just can't go without, and that's going to be an ND filter. Now, ND filters you've probably heard about. They're more like sunglasses for your lens, and they help bring down the exposure when things get a little bit too bright. However, depending on the ND filter you're going to get, sometimes you get different patterns that are on there that you might not want, things like vignetting, or at the very worst, something called color cast, which messes up your entire image and the colors that it can produce. However, the sponsor of this video, who's NISI, actually sent me the FILMMAKER kit that not only has an ND filter inside of it, but it also has a matte box to actually really hone in and customize the different looks that you want. Well, we'll get to it. Now, the NISI matte box system might look a little bit intimidating if it's your first time dealing with matte boxes, but it's actually pretty simple to follow. Now, this system does have 4 adapter rings for 67, 72, 77, and 82 filter threads, which are pretty common amongst a lot of the lenses that you might have. All you have to do is put the adapter ring on the front of your lens, put that adapter ring with your lens on it on the matte box, and everything's going to function as well as you expect it to. The NISI FILMMAKER set has the ability to actually put in 2 filter slots at 4x4 and 4x5. Now, in the 4x4 slot, we're actually going to put in the built-in ND that's going to be in there. Now, the built-in ND that comes with the system is going to have a 1 to 5 stop, and we're going to have a situation where we might need to use a little bit more. However, when you use the 1 to 5 stop, it's called something called a true color ND. Now, what we mentioned before in the intro is that some ND filters are going to have something called color casting. And the cheaper ND filters that you go to, if you get a cheap brand on Amazon, what might end up happening is you might have some color casting going on in your image, something that actually nobody really wants. Essentially, with ND filters, you're putting glass in front of glass, and it might not give you the same image. However, with the true color, it's supposed to be more accurate. So let's actually just see how good that does. Now, the Sony FX6's built-in ND is going to be the most quote-unquote color accurate. When you compare it to the NISI C5, it does lean a little bit warmer and a little bit more magenta. Now, I do think that when you're using true color ND filters, it's meant to neutralize the green. The opposite of that is going to be more purple or magenta. But this is actually the closest I've ever gotten between the C5 filter on the front of my lens and the built-in ND that's going to be on my camera. And to be completely honest, you're probably going to white balance when you're color grading your footage anyways, and they're actually going to look almost distinguishable between each other. And on top of that, I don't notice any loss in quality while using the glass filter on the front of my lens. So this is actually pretty good as far as matching to the built-in NDs in a camera that already has them. You might run into situations where you still need a little bit more underexposure, especially when you want to keep things like your aperture and all your other settings exactly the same, which is great because the FILMMAKER set actually does have another filter on it to actually add 6 to 9 stops more of ND. So you'll be able to really bring things down if things get a little bit too bright, especially in the summertime where it's high noon and everything's going to be pretty much overexposed. Now, with this filter, it's going to be a little bit different. You're going to make sure that your 4x4 ND filter is still in your matte box, but you are going to add the 4x5 filter on top of that in order for you to get more stops of ND. This actually comes into one problem that I run into a little bit, and it's because I actually like using other 4x5 filters like diffusion or something like a circular polarizer. However, because there's only 2 slots in the C5 filmmaking set, if I have to get 6 to 9 stops of ND, I don't have a lot of space to put in another filter if that's a look I'm going for. However, if I am in broad daylight and I do want to have more accurate color and also get my exposure right, you get to pay the cost to be the boss in order for you to get what you want. Now, if you know anything about me and my shooting style, I love using just a little bit of diffusion. And the FILMMAKER set by NISI also does have a 4x5 diffusion filter. Now, I'm going to be completely honest, this is the first time I've actually owned one of these, and I'm really excited because what ends up happening when you're using a filter system through a matte box is that it doesn't actually matter which lens you're going to be using. In this situation, all you have to do is just take off the ring on the front of your lens and put it on the next lens, and you don't have to worry about having multiple filters for multiple lenses. You could just adapt it to whatever size of the lens you're using, and you always have a similar look. And not only am I going to test out the diffusion filter that's going to be on this NISI system, but there is one more thing that I want to do. Now, we did mention a lot of the characteristics of ND filters is essentially glass on top of glass, and it's going to give you different looks. However, I do have a couple of different filters that we can use in order to compare and see which one actually functions a little bit better. Now, we have our Sony FX6 built-in ND. Again, that's going to kind of be our control for the quote-unquote most color-accurate filter that we're going to have. Now, the NISI C5 we talked about before. It's a little bit warmer, it's a little bit magenta, but you could always color white balance yourself back into the actual ranges that you need to be in. Now, compared to the Tilta, this is where I'm talking talking about where you're going to get a green color cast while using traditional ND filters. This is actually pretty common in screw-on NDs, and it's not going to be that much different on the Tilt and Mirage. It's going to lean a little bit more on the green side of things, but personally for me, I'd rather come back from magenta than going up from a green. Freewell K2 also has a true color ND as well, and it does lean a little bit magenta, but more so than the NISI C5. One of the theories I did have, like I mentioned before, is I think true color ND, what it does is tries to neutralize the green tint that you would normally get by making it magenta instead. Now, between the Freewell and the NISI, where I'd rather come back from magenta, I still like the NISI because of its functionality, its build, and it actually has really great quality as well. And also, in side by side, it's not as purple as you would expect on the NISI side of things versus the K2 filter by Freewell. And here's all of the filters when you put them all side by side. And I'm actually going to color correct all of them by just white balancing to a white, and honestly, they all look pretty similar. Now, there is one thing that you might encounter while using ND filters in general, and that's going to be vignetting. Now, vignetting happens when you have dark corners around your image, and sometimes it does end up happening if you're using ND filters on wider focal lengths. So I decided to test this on my 20mm lens and the 16-35 G Master to find out at the wider focal lengths exactly where you start to see dark corners, if you see them at all. Now, I did shoot on 60mm G Master lens at 5 stops of ND, and the vignetting on there is almost unnoticeable. There is a little bit of a dark corner that's in the top right corner, but honestly, I think that's just because the room is actually darker rather than the ND filter. And at 6 to 9 stops, when you put two pieces of glass on top of each other, you are going to notice a little bit of vignetting in the corners. Now, this is going to be a lot better than having an X pattern that's going to go all the way across, which you might find on other cheaper NDs. However, at the 9 stop, at the farthest most extreme with a white wall, there's a minimal amount of vignetting on the corners, but this is manageable enough, and you can either grade yourself out of these, or honestly, it looks like it's part of a look. Now, the reason why I like ND filter matte box systems is for two specific reasons. One, I want to get unwanted flare out, especially if I'm not shooting an anamorphic. I just don't want things to look off-putting. And two, I do like the ND filter system where it doesn't matter which lens I'm going to be using. Now, as someone who has a Sony FX30, and a lot of you guys on this channel that are watching do, getting ND filters that are going to be color accurate is going to make your life a heck of a lot easier. Unfortunately, with some of the cameras available nowadays, you don't have the option of built-in NDs like my Sony FX6, and using something with color accuracy and the ability to control exposure is actually something that's really handy for you. I actually just did a video using the Sirui Nightwalkers, which actually go down to T1.2, which means it lets in a lot of light, which means I do need an ND filter to help bring things back. And for the majority of that video, I did use the NISI C5 system. On top of that, if you are somebody with a Sony FX6, you might be a little bit frustrated at the fact that the ND filters built in only has about 7 stops in it, which means that you could still use something like the C5 system on a camera like the Sony FX6 to give you a couple extra stops of ND, especially if you're in a really bright situation. Now, the C5 FILMMAKER set that I have currently in this video is about $569 when you go and pick that up, which is actually pretty competitive with the other matte box filter systems that are available, and it is a little bit more useful than a regular circular filter. However, if you are someone that likes a little bit more minimalism and you do like something more compact, you could always just get the circular version of the True Color ND filter. However, for my taste, I do prefer using a matte box, especially if I'm in a more professional shoot, and I like the flexibility of using any lens that I want by just using the adapter clamp, and also being able to use multiple filters at the same time. That being said, I hope you guys learned something, or at the very least you enjoyed this video. And if you guys do want to see more footage using the C5 system, I did a whole bunch of stuff using the Sirui Nightwalker lenses, well, these guys over here, and you can check that out in a video right over here. There's a ton of footage in there, and I'll see you there. Peace.